Today we will be doing the poem Ode to Autumn by the English Romantic poet John Keats, born on 31st October 1795, died on 23rd February 1821. The work Ode to Autumn was composed on 19 September 1819 and published in 1820 in a volume of Keats's poetry that included Lammy and the Eve of St. Agnes. To Autumn is the final work in a group of poems known as Keats's 1819 Odes. Although personal problems left him little time to devote to poetry in 1819, he composed To Autumn after a walk near Winchester one autumnal evening. The work marks the end of his poetic career as he needed to earn money and could no longer devote himself to the lifestyle of a poet. A little over a year after the publication of Ode to Autumn, Keats died in Rome. The poem has three 11-line stanzas which describe a progression through the seasons from the late maturation of the crops to the harvest and to the last days of autumn when winter is nearing. The imagery is richly achieved through the personification of autumn and the description of its bounty, its sights and sounds. It has parallels in the works of English literature landscape artists, with Keats himself describing the fields of stubble that he saw on his walk as conveying the warmth of some pictures. The work has been interpreted as a meditation on death, as an allegory of artistic creation, as Keats's response to Peterloo Massacre. One of the most anthologized English lyric poems, Ode to Autumn has been regarded by critics as one of the most perfect short poems in the English language. During the spring of 1819, Keats wrote many of his major odes: Ode on a Grecian Urn, Ode on Indolence, Ode on Melancholy, Ode to a Nightingale, and Ode to Psyche. After a month, After the month of May, he began to pursue other forms of poetry, including the verse tragedy, Otho the Great, in collaboration with his friend and roommate Charles Brown, the second half of Lamia, and a return to his unfinished epic Hyperion. His efforts from spring until autumn were dedicated completely to a career in poetry, alternating between writing long and short poems and setting himself a goal to compose more than 50 lines of verse each day. In his free time, he also read works as varied as Robert Burton's The Anatomy of Melancholy, Thomas Charlton's poetry, and Leigh Hunt's essays. Ode to Autumn describes in its three stanzas three different aspects of the season: its fruitfulness, its labor, and its ultimate decline. Through the stanzas, there is a progression from early autumn to mid autumn and then to the heralding of winter. When we do this line by line analysis of the poem, you will see this. Parallel to this, the poem depicts the day turning from morning to afternoon and into dusk. These progressions are joined with a shift from the tactile sense to that of sight and then of sound, creating a three-part symmetry which is not present in Keats's other odes. As the poem progresses, autumn is represented metaphorically as one who conspires, plans, who ripens fruits, who harvests, who makes music. The first stanza of the poem represents autumn as involved in the promotion of natural processes, growth, and ultimate maturation, two forces in opposition in nature, but together creating the impression that the season will not end. In this stanza, the fruits are still ripening and the buds still opening in the warm weather. Stuart Sperry says that Keats emphasizes the tactile sense here, suggested by the imagery of growth and gentle motion, swelling, bending, and plumping. In the second stanza, autumn is personified as a harvester, to be seen by the viewer in various guises performing laboring tasks essential to the provision of food for the coming year. There is a lack of definitive action, all motion being gentle. Autumn is not depicted as actually harvesting, but as seated, resting, or watching. In lines 14 to 15, the personification of autumn is as an exhausted laborer near the end of the stanza. The steadiness of the gleaner in the lines 19 to 20 again emphasizes emotionlessness within the poem. The progression through the day is revealed in actions that are suggestive of the drowsiness of afternoon. The harvested grain is being winnowed, the harvester is asleep or returning home, the last drops issue from the cider press. The last stanza contrasts autumn's sounds with those of spring. The sounds that are presented are not only those of autumn but essentially the gentle sounds of the evening. Gnats wail and lambs bleat in the dusk. As night approaches within the final moments of the song, death is slowly approaching alongside the end of the year. The full grown lambs, like the grapes, goods, and the hazelnuts, will be harvested for the winter. The twittering swallows gather for departure, leaving the fields bare. The whistling redbreast and the chirping cricket are the common sounds of the winter. The references to spring, the growing lambs, and the migrating swallows remind the reader that the seasons are a cycle, widening on the scope of this stanza from a single season to life in general. Of all Keats's poem, To Autumn with its catalogue of concrete images, most closely describes a paradise as realized on earth while also focusing on archetypal symbols connected with the seasons. Within the poem, autumn represents growth, maturation, and finally an approaching death. There is a fulfilling union between the ideal and the real. To Autumn is thematically connected to other odes that Keats wrote in 1819. For example, in his Ode to Melancholy, a major theme is the acceptance of the process of life. When this theme appears later in Ode to Autumn, however, it is with a difference. This time, the figure of the poet disappears. There is no exhortation of an imaginary reader. There are no open conflicts and dramatic debate, protest, and qualification are absent. In process, there is a harmony between the finality of death and hints of renewal of life in the cycle of Yeah, to repeat, in process, there is a harmony between the finality of death and hints of renewal of life in the cycle of seasons, paralleled by the renewal of a single day. Critics have tended to emphasize different aspects of the process. Some have focused on renewal. Walter Jackson Bate points to the theme of each stanza, including its contrary idea, here death implying, though only indirectly, the renewal of life. Also noted by both Bate and Jennifer Wagner, the structure of the verse reinforces the sense of something to come. To the placing of the couplet before the end of each stanza creates feeling of suspension, highlighting the theme of continuation. Other critics like Harold Bloom have emphasized the exhausted landscape, the completion, the finality of death, although Winter descends here as a man might hope to die with a natural sweetness. If death in itself is final, here it comes with a lightness, a softness, also pointing to an acceptance of process beyond the possibility of grief. The progress of growth is no longer necessary, maturation is complete, and life and death are in harmony. The rich description of the cycle of the seasons enables the reader to feel a belonging to something larger than the self. As James O'Rourke expresses it, but the cycle comes to an end each year, analogous to the ending of single life. O'Rourke suggests that something of a fear of that ending is subtly implied at the end of the poem. Although, unlike the other great odes, in this poem the person of the poet is entirely submerged. So there is, at most, a faint hint of Keats's own possible fear. According to Helen Wendler, Ode to Autumn may be seen as an allegory of artistic creation as the farmer processes the fruits of the soil into what sustains the human body. So the artist processes the experiences of life into a symbolic structure that may sustain the human spirit. This process involves an element of self sacrifice by the artist, analogous to the living grains being sacrificed for human consumption. In Ode to Autumn, as a result of this process, the rhythms of the harvesting artist goddess permeate the whole world until all visual, tactile, and kinetic presence is transubstantiated into an Apollonian music for the ear, the sound of the poem itself. Ode to Autumn, as Bewell argues, Keats was at once voicing a very personal expression of desire for health and constructing a myth of a national environment. This political element in the poem, Bowell points out, that has also been suggested by Jeffrey Hartman, who expounded a view to the Ode to Autumn as an ideological poem whose form expresses a national idea. Thomas McFarland, on the other hand, in 2000 cautioned against overemphasizing the political, social, or historical readings of the poem, which distract from its consummate surface and bloom. Most important, Ode to Autumn, is in its concentration of imagery and illusion, in its evocation of nature, conveying an interpretation of livingness and dyingness as contained in the very nature of autumn. In the next video, we will be doing a line by line analysis of the poem. Till then, take care.